Hello everyone, and welcome to Chapter 13, Mass Media Effects. In this chapter, we're going to look at the effects of media on society, the theories that try to describe the effects of media, and ideas about how media products affect behavior and culture and lifestyles and attitudes, as well as some of the theories on the effects of controversial topics like media violence. So the story begins with the famous broadcast of War of the Worlds by Orson Welles. And there's a link there if you want to watch, or not watch, but listen to that broadcast that was done on October 30th, 1938, right around Halloween. And media theorists have classified this broadcast as a perfect example of the magic bullet theory. It's exactly how the theory worked. The message was injected directly into the bloodstream of the public and created this uniform thinking. And then millions of people panicked under this guise that aliens had attacked the United States. So the effects of this broadcast suggested that the media could manipulate a passive and gullible public, leading theorists to believe that this was one of the primary ways media authors shaped audience perception. So they just thought they could shoot out a message and the public was so gullible that they would just accept it. So the War of the Worlds broadcast raised a lot of questions about the effects of media, and early scholars thought that media had this profound controlling effect on people. And studies have been done trying to figure out how all these messages we receive actually do affect us every day, and that's what we're going to look into as we go through this chapter. So here's the effects theories. The old one, of course, was the magic bullet theory or the powerful effects theory. It's also called the hypodermic model because it's seen as injecting us with information. Then newer model is the minimalist effects theory, which is more widely accepted, and this is just a two-step model or a multi-step model in more contemporary versions. And then recently scholars have kind of leaned back towards the powerful effects theory, the very old one, but they've added to it saying that the media does inject us in certain ways or shoots a bullet of information into us in certain ways, but it doesn't happen instantaneously like they used to think. This happens over time. It's a cumulative effect. And then under this title of cumulative effects is Elizabeth Noel Newman's Spiral of Silence. And the Spiral of Silence talks about how things in the minority opinion get pushed down while things in the majority opinion get raised up, because people who have a minority opinion are less likely to talk about their ideas if they don't think anybody agrees with them. And widely accepted ideas aren't analyzed very much, so it can be dangerous. So for the most part, our lives are just completely saturated by media. And there's been fears, as long as there's been mass media, that it's hypnotizing us and controlling us, that it tells us what to buy and what to think, that it can change our sexual preference, cause us to be violent. And throughout time, the sources have changed. Like when we had books, they thought that books would control the people, and then when radio came, they thought that radio would control the people, and then TV, and then comic books were having a horrible effect on teenagers, and music and movies. And so throughout time, it just became accepted that the media was powerful, but it had been overestimated, and that the media's effect was more indirect, more minimalist. So let's look at each of these in more detail. The powerful effects theory, the bullet theory or the hypodermic needle, states that instructions could be given directly to the audience. Information gets injected into people like a hypodermic needle. And so I have a graph here that kind of shows this early mass communication model. You have the mass media there, and all the people are being shot with information. So the third person effect was part of this line of thinking, and it was exemplified by committees when they would get together to review films and they would deem them unsuitable for the general public. They would claim that it didn't harm them when they were watching it, but it was bad for other people who couldn't handle it, that they could handle it but others couldn't. So that was one of the reasons that this bullet theory kind of fell to the wayside, because it wasn't harming the people who were saying it was harming others. They overestimated the effects on other people. The bullet model fell out of favor and gave way to sociologist Paul Lazarsfeld's minimalist effects theory. Lazarsfeld found that people were more influenced by friends and acquaintances, and that these acquaintances and friends were known as opinion leaders. And they could be teachers or clergy or local shop owners or other community leaders that were saw as having, that just had a greater control over public opinion. But not all people in leadership positions were regarded as opinion leaders. This personal connection to an opinion leader is more influential than the media itself. So on the left there you see this two-step flow model, and that's the mass media kind of shooting out in that bullet formation, but it's hitting these central figures, these opinion leaders, and then the opinion leaders are telling all the individuals that they come in contact with how to think. The expanded version of this was the multi-step flow, and it was more complex. The influence could be multi-directional and flow back and forth, and every person that the information flows through changes it and gets an additional perspective added to it, like a game of telephone. So you have the mass media shooting out these messages to opinion givers, opinion receivers, and opinion influencers who are changing what was said. This is also known as the diffusion of innovations theory, and it predicts that the media as well as interpersonal contacts provide information and influence opinion and judgment. So it focuses on the conditions which increase or decrease the likelihood of a new product or an idea or a practice will be adopted by members of a given culture and society. So there's a way that was proposed by Everett Rogers of how innovations occur within society, and he argued that it consisted of 4 stages, that there was invention, and then diffusion, which was just the communication through the social system, and then time to let the word get around, and then the consequences of that innovation would deem whether it was good or not. So the information flows through networks. The nature of the networks and the roles of the opinion leaders are important to how easily an innovation will be adopted. Then the diffusion is the process by which an innovation is communicated through certain channels over a period of time among the members of a social system. And an innovation is just the idea or the practice or the product that's perceived to be new by an individual. So one of the most recent models is the cumulative effects theory. And in this theory, it's understood that in today's world, the media is ubiquitous and it's inescapable, and we're completely saturated in it. And it's similar to the bullet model, but it has to be repeated over time. So you can't just shoot people with the information and then it's imprinted. You have to shoot them over and over and over and over again throughout time to make sure that the message sticks. And within this cumulative effects theory is the spiral of silence that was created by Elizabeth Noel Newman, which I talked about a little bit earlier. And it basically just states that the more we think other people agree with our opinions, the more likely we are to speak out. So if we feel that others do not agree with us, we get intimidated. So minorities' views are spiraled into obscurity and silence, and the more consensus on a topic, the less it's evaluated or reviewed, and so there's danger in that. If everybody agrees on something, nobody will analyze it. One of the ways the rise of mass media has affected our lifestyles is through a process of socialization. The media, from a young age, begin flooding us with information about society. So most of this info is for the benefit of society. Be kind to friends, after school specials, science is cool, etc. But young people in society take a lot of cues from the media, and they are inundated with it from a really young age, and this information helps us become socialized into society. And this kind of information used to come primarily from our families and our communities, and now it flows from many outside sources. So it's changed our lifestyles in that way and kind of had this homogenization effect where children are socialized similarly. Another effect of the mass media is that the agenda of society is supported through pro-social messages that benefit society, like the texting while driving campaign keeps drivers safe and supports safer roads, which is good for people. So there's this agenda of society that gets supported through the media and is part of the socialization process so that we know what we should and shouldn't do, and to support safety and the same line of thinking as the rest of society. Another effect the mass media has perpetrated on lifestyles is a decline in membership in clubs and outside groups. With things like television and the internet, we now live in a way where we are all isolated together. So we are separated from each other, but receiving the same messages. So I might not know my neighbor who lives 2 doors down, but we may have the same jeans and a similar music collection because of television and the internet. So we're all isolated together. Before this mass access to information through television and other venues that we could view alone, people had to go out and become part of social clubs and groups in order to understand what was happening in the world around them. Another byproduct of mass media on lifestyle is the idea of intergenerational eavesdropping, or that people can listen to conversations outside of their group now. Like children can learn about sex from TV at a very young age, women can learn what men talk about, and men can learn what women talk about. And so as a result, our kids may know more than we did at their age, and women and men may know some things that they would rather not. So the media has really just changed how we interact and our socialization process by homogenizing it, making it more transparent, and keeping it all in line with other people that we don't know. So within culture, not only in the United States, there's been numerous shifts, and these changes, they're global. The Western world pumps out tons of media, and the images and music and ways to dress and even how people decorate their homes has become homogenized globally now and influenced cultural change throughout the world. So let's look a little bit more at culture diffusion. And this is just when these innovations get diffused into our culture. And the way that this happens is through 3 steps. You have the redundancy of the message plus extended period of time, and then the message gets diffused through people. So innovations are just an idea that is new to a person who hears it. And in order for these to get diffused into our culture, there has to be these 3 steps. First, there's awareness, and that's the point where we realize that there is an alternative to our thinking. And then there's an interest, when we feel compelled to get more information about a topic because of our interest level. And then evaluation, and that's the point where we decide if we will adopt the new idea or reject it. Behavioral research in the media looks at why the masses do what they do, why they buy what they buy, and how they can be affected by images and sounds. In the 50s, Sigmund Freud's theories about the human mind being unconsciously susceptible to suggestion was being popularized, and it also coincided with an interest in brainwashing. So Freud's ideas pointed to repressed primal urges that motivated humans to act in various ways, and in the 50s, this just became very popular to look for marketing professionals to look to social science for information on how to motivate the masses to purchase things. Ernest Dichter was one of the first to use Freudian line of thinking to innovate the advertising field. And what he did is he tried to speak to the public's unconscious desires, and he called his technique motivational research. So he would find out what it was that people wanted, their primal desires, and then he would link products to those primal desires, like a car being linked to the idea of a mistress or a beautiful woman. And of course, in this cigarette ad, it's pretty obvious the link between the subconscious and the cigarette ad. So there was also this idea of subliminal messages, which were kind of perpetrated by a fellow who was flashing Coca-Cola and popcorn across the screen during movies and said that it had increased sales, but it could not be replicated. And so there's actually no evidence that subliminal marketing works, but it's still used sometimes. I will leave this link for a newer form of marketing called reptilian marketing, which is kind of linked to this Freudian idea. It's where products are marketed as in line with what people think about them. I think in the video he talks about cheese in France is seen as a living thing, and in America it's seen as dead, and so we put it in a body bag, our little cheese slices in a body bag, because it fits more in line with what we think about cheese. So there's some weird ideas floating around there, but they seem to work for the most part, and if they don't, then it just creates silly things that we have. So let's look at violence. There are pro-social effects of media, such as cutting down on the number of people that text and drive, and how we learn to belong in our culture, and the values that we share from depictions and information that are given to us through a variety of sources. And the pro-social process is also known as observational learning. And really, if we believe that we can learn good things from the media, then it seems logical that we should believe that we can learn bad or deviant behaviors as well. In the famous Bobo doll experiments by Albert Bandura in the 1960s, he's a heavyweight in behavior theories that are commonly used in teaching, but he found that children who saw violent movies were more likely to beat the dolls in the experiment than children who did not see violent behavior before having contact with the toy. And so Bandura's experiments with the Bobo doll, the results have been challenged a lot by other scholars who feel that he misread the kids' playfulness and that he just misunderstood what was happening, that they were playing. And then I think back to an instance with me and my brother. I was probably 8 years old, and he and I were watching a kung fu movie, and right after the movie I jumped up and karate chopped him right in the back, and I almost knocked him unconscious. And it was a playful act, but it was an overly aggressive response to play. And I think it was in response to the media that we viewed. He was my Bobo doll, and so I can see how watching violence can incite you to do violent things, even if it's not out of anger or haste or being mean. So observational learning and aggressive stimulation propose that we emulate what we see modeled, and if we see aggression, it stimulates us to act in the same fashion. More on violence. The Catalytic Theory looks at the media as fuel for people who are predisposed to violence. Ted Bundy had claimed that he was attracted to pornography from a young age, and over the course of years, pornography fueled his desire to murder and rape 30 women. And in interviews, he said that his pornography addiction was not the reason that he did what he did, but it was a catalyst for his sick fantasies. So it catalyzed the fact that he was having these thoughts. Then there is the old cathartic effect that was proposed by Aristotle first. He put forth an idea that watching violence allows us to release pent-up aggression vicariously, and that without being able to view it, we would just blow up. So he saw that violence was a necessity, and that we all have violent tendencies, and that seeing acts of violence was positive for us to help us not act out our own tendencies. And studies have been done to support this idea. One interesting one in particular was done with junior high school boys by Seymour Feshbach. He let 2 different classes of boys view violent programs for 6 weeks, and then another group watched nonviolent programs, and he found that there was no change in the group who had watched the nonviolent programs, and he found a decrease in violent behavior among the group that had viewed the more violent films. And the decrease was among boys who had a tendency to be more aggressive based on personality tests that he had given prior to the study. And then I put a picture of Clockwork Orange up there. He was a bad, violent guy, and he was forced to watch violent behavior while being nauseated to release that desire to harm people and to condition him to be sickened by his actions, like one of Pavlov's dogs. So let's look at desensitizing theory. I think of desensitizing theory like the reaction of a bird or a deer on the side of the road. The first time they land there, they're probably frightened by the cars, and then after a while they are conditioned to understand that the cars that go by aren't hitting them, and so they don't jump anymore or move, and they become conditioned to tolerate the noise and the wind without fear. But in media depictions of violence, this desensitizing of the audience is scrutinized a lot. It's chicken or the egg. Do we depict more violence as a result of our thinking, or do more depictions lead us to be more accepting of it and allow it to happen? George Gerbner was a famous scholar and researcher about violence in media, and he began tracking violence in 1967, and he found that the typical American child sees 32,000 murders and 40,000 attempted murders on screen before they turn 18. And he cited that this volume of violence in the media created a situation called the mean world syndrome, that people view the world as a place that is far more dangerous and mean than it truly is. So Gerbner thought that a dangerous side effect of this mean world thinking is that people would accept a police state in order to remain safe from their perceived dangers, and that this would have frightening consequences for free and open societies. I also think that mean world syndrome could lead to more reactive, frightened people who might become violent out of fear because they're fearful of the world that they live in. So here's another discussion topic that we'll cover in class. Do you think that people are generally fearful of the world and perceive it as dangerous? And is the world more dangerous than it used to be? All right, so think about the discussion questions throughout, and I have a video that we will watch in class to support or refute some of the things that were said here today, and we'll discuss it. It's Steven Pinker's The Myth of Violence, his TED Talk, and we'll look at that. And thank you for listening, and have a great day.